This is not about students expressing ideas. It is about a change in tactics that presents a concern and a normalization and mainstreaming of rhetoric. And I'm not just talking about language, I'm now talking about tactics, and that's what shifted our response yesterday. But a normalization and mainstreaming of rhetoric associated with terrorism that has now become pretty common on college campuses.
As of right now, students do not have access to where their money is going when they pay tuition fees to this university. So crucially, our first demand is full disclosure of financial investments. We want to know where all of the money is going. We think that that's key for students to know where their money is going, whether it's about Israel or not. But then, with this knowledge, we would like to pursue full divestment from two things. First, from all arms manufacturing companies. Whether it's the current genocide in Gaza or other armed conflict around the world, our university should not be investing in that. This is a situation where we should be learning and contributing to education and a safe community, not to international conflict. And secondly, we request and demand that the university divest from all holdings in any entities that sponsor or are complicit in Israeli occupation, apartheid, and the current genocide in Gaza. Additionally, we have boycott demands, key of which is the demand to stop banking with Barclays, which the university currently does. Barclays has been complicit in the architecture of Israeli apartheid, and so that's a key demand from the boycott, divestment, and sanctions global movement. And our last demand is that the university commits to a Palestinian-led rebuilding of the Gazan higher education sector.
Okay. And now Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary is sounding off with a word of caution for those agitators. O'Leary warning that student protesters are trashing their job chances, adding that when it comes to their futures, they are screwed. Why are they screwed? Is it because, I mean, a lot of them are wearing masks, they're trying to hide their identity. Do you think that'll work?
Today, all of this video security cameras are at 1080p and 4K resolution, extremely high resolution that allows you to use AI protocols to identify people by the iris, or just a partial exposure of the face. Do you ever wonder how they captured every single person that marched on the Hill in the insurgents? Now, whether they arrested or not didn't matter, but every single individual on that hill eventually was identified using this AI technology today. It's very available, it's inexpensive, and I use it as an employer every time we have a candidate in the executive suite. But if you're fighting police, burning flags, wrecking properties, breaking through windows, I'm going to know that. And so is the government, so is everybody else. So think about that. That's all I'm telling these young people. Think about it, because it's not free.
Welcome to What's Left, the weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo, a co-host, featuring socialist Andy Lipson and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where you found this episode. And we also have shirts as merch that you can contact Andy for. All right. Andy, do you have shout outs?
I do. Oh, wait, there is one. Cameron Muhammad said, Mr. Lipson, can you shout me out? And I can't. So, Cameron, here's your shout out. But you needed to do more of your work, so your grade isn't that good. Sorry.
I don't know if you should say that on the public.
Hey, man, if you're going to ask for a shout out, I'm going to tell you the truth.
All right. Okay. Let's do this. Campus protests. Andy, you wanted to do this even right before some episodes pass. It's the end of the school year. There are lots of things happening all over this country and as well as other countries where people are trying to be in solidarity. And it's all related around Palestine, really.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can delve into what we each have, what we're seeing, what we've been aware of, and the importance and significance and maybe our differences.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to talk about it is, you know, I didn't really know much about these campus occupations. I know they started in Columbia and then they just spread to a number of other schools. I was like, in fact, I think in an episode I'd been sort of like, yes, I support it, but these people didn't do anything about COVID and even they're wearing masks and like that. I think that was kind of dismissive. If I look back on it, I'm not sure I would agree with the way I talked about it there. But in the coming weeks after the occupation started, I definitely received things. There were definitely points of view from within the freedom movement of like these campus occupations are an op, are a psyop, are like color revolutions. At one level, they're being used for the purposes of the elections. Some people saying it somehow supported Biden, other people saying it supported Trump. But basically, the idea was that these and also that these occupations are supported by George Soros, and that they're not an expression of legitimate disgust and anger by either students or people who are connected to the students on a like if when there's demonstrations in Berkeley, it's not just Berkeley students who participated. They may be the initiators of it, but generally people who are in the Berkeley atmosphere or in the Berkeley region will also attend those demonstrations. So that's the kind of things that's been happening in New York and in Columbia and in Virginia and Texas, in California, and also now across in Europe. Places like Oxford, I know, has had some, and they've been spread to there as well. So I wanted to talk about that and see what people make of that. I mean, I ended up talking with Jake about this, and we had a bit of a disagreement. I think the interesting thing I got from Jake was him seeing this as sort of the opposite of the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement at the time of the 2020 election came in as a way of sort of supporting Biden, as a way of building support for the Democratic Party. And he see this as the inverse, is like this is a movement which builds support for Trump and makes it more likely that Biden will lose and Trump will win. But he again is talking about it as something that is engineered and doesn't have its own impetus coming from below, or at least he's not emphasizing that. And that would be my critique, because I think there is a genuine sentiment from below about this thing. Even if I have a criticism of maybe what these students were doing back in the day around COVID, because many of them would have been people who would have been telling you wear your mask and things like that. Well, now I think some of these folks are actually fighting the state, I would say, and fighting the military machine that is trying to fight wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and in the South Pacific and in China and Taiwan. So I want to talk about that here and say why I don't share the criticisms, even if there's some elements of truth in some of these things. I think it misses the overall direction of this movement. Yeah, that is something that I think people who are fighting for freedom, regardless of what these students thought about COVID, or even think about COVID, or even think about lockdowns, I think this should be supported by people who are fighting for a better world and fighting for a free world. So that was something I wanted to talk about.
Eduardo, do you want to share like your initial?
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing Colombia, not Colombia, right? We're not the country of Colombia. We're
yeah. We're talking about the campus,
the university.
Yeah. I think it's in New York, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so, all right. Well, I guess I was just going to say I was in Colombia, the country, when I first started. That's why I was trying to differentiate. Like, I don't remember any of this in Colombia. I'm thinking, I was in Colombia when I first started hearing these protests. I mean, I think I too was a bit dismissive, maybe because of former days of mine where I would have been supportive and also participated in many protests in the Bay Area, in other student movements. And I guess I've become cynical and I don't want to become that way. That's the first thing I want to call myself out for. Where I have become cynical when I hear or see something and I don't think that their principles are aligned across the board with the things that I think they should have been supportive beforehand. Very similarly to you, Eddie. You know, I think about the censorship that was the support for censorship, and now we're discussing how people are being censored from like valedictorians. Excuse me. I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
Valedictorians allowed to give speeches, and now the issue of like they're censoring our voice, and you know, and people are allowed, and then how I was listening to how some people say that some Jewish students are using. By the way, George Soros is Jewish, isn't he? Is he?
I think I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, I think it's interesting how people think that he's funded by George Soros when George Soros is Jewish, you know. But anyhow, and how I thought about how this idea of people saying, oh well, Jewish students saying how they feel threatened, and now professors are coming aboard and they say, well, you're allowed to speak up for your safety, as in your physical safety, but not your intellectual. If you feel threatened intellectually, that's a whole different thing. And I'm thinking to myself, that sounds great. Where was that intellectual debate 2020, 2021? You know, I feel threatened. People used to say, I feel threatened by you not taking COVID seriously, you know? And it's like, well, I'm not discussing your physical safety. I'm discussing an intellectual debate here about, does it make sense? You know, and now suddenly professors are coming out and it's like, we're threatened intellectually because they're not allowing us to have debate on campuses. We're not allowed to say, you know, that song that's like across the river, or what was it? It's like from the river to the sea.
Yeah. Palestine will be free.
Palestine will be free, and we're not allowed to say certain things, and it's like, oh my fucking God, how hypocritical, you know. I tried to I was very upset by everything I was hearing and how many people I tuned into Democracy Now! And thinking, wow, so many voices are being lifted right now on that platform, and they're talking about all the things that we've talked about, you know, the need for us to have to be heard, or to have honest debates, and not to be censored. And here we are, people are repeating some of the same things. So that was my first reaction in cynicism, and I didn't want to be a part of it. And I bought a Palestinian flag and put it on my just because I wanted to start the conversation, and put it in my apartment in Bogota, Colombia. And people kind of looked at it, and it was a good conversation starter. And people would say to me, well, what's that about? And I'd say, well, I think that we should have a discussion about what's happening here in Colombia with the cédula. Everything. When you go to El De Uno is like a Walmart or like a Walgreens or kind of like those chain shops. You go to El De Uno and they're asking you for your cédula when you pay to scan. And I thought, this is a good conversation. Like, this is what's happening, and this is what they want to do everywhere. And this is what's happening in Bogota. And so I make it about the connection about Colombia and Israel and Palestine. And so I had that flag up for that reason. And here we are. And I feel almost like I don't want to display it. I don't want to do it here. I don't want to be a part of it. It's different from how I felt when I was in Colombia than how I feel here. I don't want people to think that, you know, I'm just like the Ukraine flag. Like I'm just following along with everyone else's progressive politics here. I want to have I want to have a stronger debate. I want to have a good conversation about the importance of why we should also consider the border, as that's Palestine right there. You know, our frontier, you know, and what's happening here, and everything we've discussed on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So anyhow, that's my initial thought.
So again, I think we're sharing the same cynicism, or initial cynicism about what was happening. I, by and large, really ignored it. Like it was just in the background. I didn't think much of it because same way I thought, either it was like an operation. No, well, actually, my first instinct was this is probably going to be captured, even if it has grassroots, origins. It's going to be captured just like BLM, right? Like a massive amount of energy, people who are outraged, right, because of what's happening. Because I I think that the protests started. It spread because of the repression that happened in Columbia University, right? I spread to other universities, and in solidarity, like they started to, spring up, and there was more repression, and it kind of reminds me of Nicaragua 2018. We have an episode of that, way back. How like people are outraged, and some people become activated through solidarity and outrage, of witnessing something violent. And so, and then I really started looking at it more when you brought it up. So it's been very recent where I've actually looked into it, and I've changed my mind, and I have more questions, and I see more value of it. I'm still somewhat skeptical. I'm not, in terms of like where this can go, but it does reveal something, I believe, and I think we might get into that, as to especially the response of the state. Because if it's not a threat, if it's nothing, why the hell are they clamping down so hard? And because it is brutal. There has been reporters who have talked about how they've witnessed, like the amount of repression. Like they've covered a lot of events in the world, and the amount of repression that they've seen in police presence is unlike anything they've seen before. And so that's one element. And then you talked about the censorship, Eduardo, like of, and then also the whole congressional hearings, and the whole narrative of anti-Semitism, this confusing, like official narrative that is thrown out there. And then I'm also curious about, the responses, but yeah, I have by and large seen more value in it, and also I'm wondering about like the lessons, right? Because this is real struggle now. This is where lessons are learned, when you're facing the apparatus, the repressive apparatus of the state. And this could potentially, I think, radicalize some people, make them understand that you don't appeal to morality in a fucking system that doesn't have it. That, there has to be concrete uh, steps, and taking up space is one fundamental thing that these people are doing, even though they're college age kids that we kind of keep saying, right, like that are being captured by technology and stuff. But they are taking up space, and some are taking up space, uh, perhaps naively or regardless of the potential, physical and or other, types of harm that can come from engaging, in this right now. And so I no longer a cynic about it. I think it's important to pay attention to it. I think it's important to support it, and be part of the conversation, and to see why this is happening. And I think that's what I'm trying to hope. That's what I'm hoping to get from this conversation here. How do we understand, the repression and what's happening?
Yeah, and maybe I'll start from there about the crackdown, because that's been one of the critics would say. I think Naomi Wolf wrote this, and I've heard this from others who've said, "Oh, well, this is like an October 7th." Like, one of the critiques of October 7th is the idea that Hamas was launched by Israel to do what they did, and then Israel would then come in with the crackdown. And so the implication is that this campus movement was launched from above, with its infiltrators. George Soros had paid hires, people who are paid through institutions that have money to George Soros, and they're kind of putting this thing in play. And so it's allowing for a crackdown. And And in the same way that January, I guess the other analogy was January 6th, right? This lets the FBI come in and well, that is true that the state can do a false flag and then we do a crackdown, but the state can also crack down against genuine movements. And both, so the question is, we have to ask which one are we facing here? And for me, when you think, there's two things, well, there's many pieces of evidence for me that tell me this is legit. The first one is that the campuses from which this launched are all campuses that are connected to the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. Like, this is not a new thing. That there has been a movement since 2005 of campuses that have been upset with what Israel is doing and have been upset with their college campuses putting money into institutions that support Israel militarily. And they're saying, we want you to disclose where your money comes from for your endowments. And we want you to, after you disclose, we want you to divest from the war machine specifically that's targeting Israel. But by and large, ultimately, it means they'd have to divest from the war machine in general, because college campuses make money by investing in things that make money. And McDonnell Douglas and Raytheon make money. And those things get money from the endowments of campuses, and they try to make their money off that. And then, of course, they say, well, we go around and that helps us subsidize what we're doing on campuses. Well, these students are saying, we don't care about that. We want you out of that. And that's been a long-standing demand. And they've done different things well before, even today, they've done different actions. It's just that this one happened to be one that hit. And the actions they're taking are completely in line with the movement that inspired them, which is the movement against apartheid in South Africa. A very similar campus occupations were done decades ago in order to get campuses divest from South Africa because of apartheid. And so the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement is doing exactly the same thing. So what you're witnessing is it's something these folks have been doing for a while. It just happens to strike at a moment when Israel is going crazy, and when there's news and things in the air or things in the media that have been able to expose how criminally violent they are. I mean, of course, I just think about the United States anyway. So it's just exposed how dangerous these capitalist states are. Because in the end, I don't think Israel is any worse than the U.S. or Russia or China or any of these warmongering states. I mean, it's just been exposed, and so that outrage for people has caused people to say, no, we're going to not let it be business as usual on these campuses, and we're going to block things off, and we're going to occupy spaces until you disclose where these endowments go, and you divest from those things that are actually just killing people in Israel. And that demand is an actual demand that would make a difference to the U.S. war machine. And it wouldn't make a difference to the U.S. war machine just in relationship to the Middle East. It would make a difference in the U.S. war machine in Ukraine, in China. Like, the implications of getting these colleges to pull their money out of the military industrial complex is pretty immense. It doesn't stop it, but it would be a big hit. And so what they're going after is something, if anyone is sick of war, even if you're not a socialist, if you're sick of the U.S. war machine, you would want to support what these students are doing, because they're trying to get themselves in the way of a piece of the machine that is generating all these weapons and this destruction. I guess I'll just leave it at that for now. So there might have been another point. No, I'll leave it at that.
I just wanted to say that this war machine doesn't just work in a direct, like, U.S. government, right, to the Israeli government. Right? It uses these private, quote unquote, private entities to also achieve the same, tactical goals. And so, like I said, it is part of the big machinery, right? Like there are different components to it. And so that's why this is significant, right? Because like you said, they are putting like a wrench in the gears. They're trying to, at least
Yeah.
one of the, it is
Oh,
something concrete, right? It's a concrete
yes.
demand.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, that was the other thing, is that this is the implication by people who've been critics, is that this is just moral outrage and it's just people who are upset. No, they have a political demand that has reason and sense, and they're now, in order to reach that political demand, they would have to go pretty. I mean, it makes sense to me that they're being cleared off now, because this isn't just a threat to the Democratic Party. The reason I don't believe Jake about it helping Trump, or I think that's the reason for it, and other people, another woman who was critical is saying somehow this helps Biden, is I actually think both parties are threatened by this kind of thing, and it doesn't help their election. I actually do think it hurts the Democrats more. And one of the ways that is coming out is, like, the Democratic Party is now talking about not actually holding its DNC live. They're talking about doing it online because they're concerned about the protests that they're going to have that are going to make their shit look bad. And they don't want another repeat of Chicago 1968, where there were massive protests against the war-making Democratic Party that was in Vietnam at that time. And those demonstrations ended up being not just the source of problems for them in the election, but the springboard for much larger demonstrations and much larger social movements that came out after that. And so I do think there's real worry about what is being set off here. And so that's why I do think the crackdown was harsh. The crackdown wasn't hard to just give the FBI powers. The FBI had already reserved, and the state has already reserved its right to do that. And you can see that those woke folks actually that are at the layer of the campuses have actually supported the crackdown, because they've said you're stopping students from being on campuses. So we're not. And in Colombia, I think they even stopped having classes altogether. Oh, you can just do it online. Like, they went to that. And so it's fairly clear to me that the forces that we have opposed, in implementing lockdowns, in implementing censorship, are on the other side of this occupation movement. They're the ones who are in the campuses, basically calling the police to say, help us. And so I believe that if you're for freedom, and if you were concerned about what was happening in 2020, you want to be with these students, because they're fighting the very same forces that we were fighting, even if those students got it wrong 4 years ago.
But we also had to look at that some of these students came into college during COVID, or like they were finishing high school when COVID happened.
Yeah.
Right. So they were affected by those. So I wouldn't automatically assume that all of them were for the lockdowns. Like I would put it more on the adults, if you can say, that run these fucking institutions. So I'm not so certain that the kids supported the lockdowns automatically, because even the whole thing about masks, right? Like at first, like I think, like you said, you had that reaction, like they're using fucking masks, but it turns out that they're using them because of facial recognition.
Right.
At least some of them have expressed that.
Yeah.
And
And these people have already experienced the threat of being kicked off campuses, of employers. I heard one person, Ken Riley, who was Ken Leary. Yeah, Kevin Leary, maybe it was. He's a bigwig capitalist dude who basically said, thank God we have AI, because these kids are going to learn a painful lesson that they're not going to have any places to get jobs later on. So they're basically treating these kids like the truckers, without taking out their bank accounts. So I think it should be fairly clear what side of the line is being drawn, like which side these students are on now. And I believe that there are people who were trained to do, like, civil disobedience training and how to organize people? Absolutely. Do I think some of those institutions take money from George Soros? Absolutely. But do I think that that is the reason that this thing got set off? No, because these kinds of movements have been going on for a while on campuses, and they haven't been able to get this kind of they haven't had the amount of like trigger for people. And I think the reason it's been a trigger is because there is genuine disgust about what's happening. There's genuine fear about how far the U.S. war machine is willing to go. I wish more of it was talking about Ukraine. It doesn't seem to take that up, but there is genuine disgust and fear about what the U.S. is doing in the Middle East in relationship to Israel, and Zionism is the Zionist project, the racist project of Zionism, is being challenged in a way that it never was before. A lot of people were willing to give Zionism a pass because it happened to defend the Jewish state that was supposedly set up to protect Jews in relationship to World War II, which is not true. That's not why it was set up. It was set up as a aircraft carrier for the British military, and then ultimately, and for the British Empire, and ultimately for the U.S. Empire. And that's why those settlers were put there and supported, because they're going to be proxy war fighters for U.S. Empire, just like they're doing in Ukraine. These are the original here in Israel, and Zionism was the project that would justify that. I guess that's it.
I just wanted to add one more thing about the outrage. Like, this is happening regardless of the massive efforts to put a lid on this, right? Like, in terms of censorship, on social media, even people who I fully don't agree with politically, like Sean, what's it, King? Is that his name?
It might be, yeah.
Yeah.
Sean King.
He was kicked off Instagram, I believe, completely. He had a massive platform. He was pro fucking like lockdowns and this stuff, or like the vaccine and this bullshit. But on this, he was exposing a lot of the stuff that was not being shown on TV, or mass like the official media. And so, despite that, there is an outrage, and there is actually, if you believe surveys and stuff, like most people in the US, like they don't like this. Like it's just and this also comes at a time where the US is being challenged in so many fronts, right? Like militarily, economically, politically, and they're gonna need Israel, in order to advance, the tactics that they're gonna need to do in order to challenge the challengers, and so, that's why this is important, for them to nip it at the butt. But at the same time, for me, it's like it's showing a sign of weakness, actually, that you have to go that hard, like the facade of civility and the mechanisms of, they're all falling apart because they're gonna have to clamp down in these ways more. As we are gearing up, for more war. It's already started, but yeah.
When I think about what you both have said, I genuinely think these are genuine protests, and I even kind of give myself a little bit of I don't want to be so jaded or so cynical, so so when students, I think they merit having the honors of beginning a lot of movements, actually. I think not so much because of universities being the it's more because of the waking up of, you come to a stage where you look beyond the self and you start looking exteriorly outside of yourself, and you begin to see, I want to do something about it. That energy is needed alongside people who've long been a veteran in movements of trying to help the world change and to be a better place. And so I want to give that special space and time and place for students and that have always been challenging the system and in some ways have tried, like in the anti-war movement, like we've seen in Vietnam and in Iraq, and now we're seeing an anti-war movement here. So I just want the conversation. As I'm looking here, I'm thinking about the surveillance and how much, there is massive surveillance necessary for any society to be managed by governments. And I have some tabs open on like what's being used that we've already discussed, like the Project Lavender. I just wish that was the center of the conversation, like it has already been shared. Like even mainstream media outlets have shared that article as that we discussed even. And that's what I hope the conversation is where it's channeling towards, that we should try to see the connections. I just that's my only hope that that's what happening. I want us to have those very honest, open debates with people. I mean, that's it for now. Then I'll see how I can bring this up.
Well, I would just say that that was one of the areas that I talked about. Like, wait, why aren't they taking up the tech part of all this? And actually, in some ways, it makes sense because their issue, not that you wouldn't take up tech, but their issue is they want the campuses to disclose where their endowments money is coming from and going to. They want transparency around that, and then they want that once you've been transparent about it, any area that is connected to something that would be sending weapons to Israel, you got to divest from. So it's disclose and divest, and so that's their focus. And it makes sense to me that they wouldn't necessarily even get into Lavender or the tech surveillance apparatus that's being so widely used in Israel and against the Palestinians that is now being used against these very same students when they are threatened with AI using facial recognition to then not allowed to give them jobs. Not that that won't become a demand later, but it kind of makes sense that it wouldn't be centered around that. And at the time I had said it, I had thought of the movement as more one of just moral outrage. And I don't think I was right. The other thing that I've heard that has been a criticism or a reason to think that it was coming from above is the coordination, is the fact that it kind of launched several places and then came upon like a wave like that. The reality is that's how social movements work. And you, Eduardo, mentioned that student movements have been the initiator of many waves of movements, and that the most famous one for me that I know of is in France, when there was a general strike in the 60s, in late 68. It was a general strike of auto workers, and I think ultimately public sector workers got involved in it as well. That really shook the entire country of France. But that movement didn't start with a general strike of workers. It started in response to students on campuses who weren't able to get into their dorms or something. It was something really not huge, but students tried to oppose it, and then the state cracked down on them. And then out of the crackdown came the response by workers who were upset about how the state was responding to those students. And then it sort of snowballed from there. And it's like, yes, sometimes movements can be coordinated by the CIA. I think that we talk about those color revolutions. And the CIA can be involved in those things, but there are also, I mean, the way class struggle looks is it often has a catalyst that then sets it off to a bigger fire. And that is the nature of class struggle. That is the nature of struggle from below. And in fact, that's what you're hoping will happen anytime you initiate something, is you are hoping it can act as a catalyst for bigger struggle to come and follow in its wake. Because that's the only hope. And obviously no single struggle of people in one area are gonna make the kind of change. So I suspect that some of the people who only see in these moments the coordination must be then the state doing it and the state guiding it. I don't think those people believe in class struggle. I don't think those people believe in struggle from below as even being possible or to shape and create a new world. They could be right. Maybe it's not possible, but that is not my viewpoint. My viewpoint is there is actually genuine independent struggle by regular people that could possibly change the world. The last thing I'll say is any struggle that happens that comes from below, if it starts to get a profile, is going to have ways in which actors that are not looking good are not looking out for that movement to come in and try to infiltrate it. That's just a reality. And so it's just going to be one of those things where we're going to have to become wiser about our own movement, and there isn't much of one, to understand that any movement that is actually truly independent is ultimately going to find, if it's successful, it's going to find that our enemies are going to find ways to try to get into it, and to try to infiltrate it, and to try to redirect it and turn it off course or discredit it somehow. That is just a reality of movements as well. And so the fact that the state can do that doesn't change the fact that these movements can be independent themselves. And Kenny, I remember you and Hema faced some of those criticisms in your struggle in Nicaragua, where, your opposition to Tega was seen as something that could just benefit the U.S. state. And there is truth in that. And I'm sure the U.S. state ultimately did start to get involved in that. But that doesn't change the fact that there were people on the ground in Nicaragua who were opposed to Ortega and wanted to take him down, that anybody who wants freedom would want to support, regardless of how deep, not regardless, but even knowing that the U.S. state will try to get in there and also mess with it. That's just the way it is.
And I think that's important, because that's what gives me the experience, right, of why I think the way I do. And I agree with you. I don't dismiss moral outrage, because I think that's an important aspect of this. And of course, the powers that be are going to try to control them. But Nicaragua is an example for me that I witnessed, something that spread like a wildfire because of moral outrage, because the protests that started after let's say the Sandinista youth, the governing party's youth, beat up elder people who were protesting because the pensions were being cut down. And so they beat up elder people, and then students started protesting, and then students got killed and beat up, and then fucking like half the country was out on the streets, and I'm sorry, but you can't plan for all that. And not only that, but I knew the people that were organizing. I knew some of the students that were getting shot. I knew some of the people that were sending contraband into schools that were being occupied by students, and the police were surrounding the students and shooting at them, and torturing them psychologically, I knew people who were disappeared. I know people who had to go into exile, and it all happened because of moral outrage. And sure, when I look back, I do think that the U.S. eventually got its hands in there, and also the movement derailed because it didn't have some clarity, and also in my revolutionary mind, an understanding of how power works. There will be repression. There will be. It will come down to that. And you cannot demand someone to go just by through and to use the mechanisms that work for the people in power. It's never going to happen like that if you want to change the society. And this is kind of my hope for some of these kids, or the people who are being repressed right now, that they learn this fundamental truth that I believe is true. That's not how you don't just appeal, to the morality or put the right people in place, or people with higher moral compasses. That's not how it fucking works. That's not how the system works at all. And so, yes, that's what I see in this movement, that there is a moral outrage that motivated other kids, and sure, there is infiltrators, there will be people that also change their mind along the way, and that is part of trying to push for change. And that's the reality of it. Nothing is going to be pure, but what I'm seeing is that the state itself, when I see the state recurring to such violent means, it means that they have a weak hand at putting a lid on this shit. So they have to, cut it cut its head off and hope that it shit doesn't keep growing, you know. And so BLM is the other, thing. I also believe that BLM started because of moral outrage. It spread like a fucking wildfire. But guess what? It was captured into the political system. But and maybe it was an creation from the beginning. Who the fuck knows? But I do know that a lot of people were motivated by moral outrage, because they saw something wrong. Like, that, when something is just not right. And so that's why I don't want to just throw that on the side, as like, that's not important. And I think that is what sets shit off. But the problem is that where we don't have sort of these political conversations, as a foundation when this kind of shit happens, because then you don't have, like the ability to criticize, who's influencing your movement, what kind of direction you want to, shape. How do we have the conversations, right? Like to push for something, how do we sustain logistically? When we think about, I listened to Scott Ritter talk about Russia and stuff. And like, you're going to go to war against, the powers that be if you want to try to make change. So how do you tactically prepare for this kind of stuff? Like, this takes preparation. It's not just like going to spring up from the ground. That it's not magic, it's going to be constant work, and like, and my only hope again is that some of these kids, and I call them kids, but learn that the realities of how the political machinery works, and the monster that they're trying to fight in order to effect change, in society, and some of them are going to pay the consequences of these new forces of repression. Because yes, this shit, not everyone is going to be arrested, but yes, identity, facial recognition, is going to have a consequences on their life. And this is the shit that we're talking about, this technocratic future that, so yes, it's already here. It is going to affect kids that were never arrested, but they were just there in the vicinity with their cell phones, or some camera capture them, some drone fucking capture them, or by association because of the digital footprint. So this is the conversation that we're gonna have to have, in order, and not just them, right? Like, and this is their way of learning. I learned a lot through COVID, and a lot of, I feel like a lot of people have learned a lot through January 6th, right? Because they've been fucking stumped on, right? Like, using bullshit laws that were enacted for Enron, I believe, like some of them, like people who committed like white collar crimes, and they've been fucking sentenced. The force of the states has come on their ass, even though they never really faced the level of repression that these kids are facing in terms of getting cracked on the head. The January 6th, but the legal system is on their ass.
Yeah.
And so they are learning their own lessons. And my hope is that these people can meet, but that's also my worry, that these bickering about, and that's where Trump comes in, right? Like, he's being a fucking master manipulator at this. That he's saying, oh, look, they're not gonna crack it down on them like they crack down on you on January 6th. So that's where that wedge comes in, and that to divide those experiences, even though they're the same shit, the same forces that are clamping down on people who are fucking outraged, morally outraged. And I just say that for now.
I appreciate you bringing me back to the importance of seeing that, because I remember the Occupy movement being also a time where, I was, even here, just in California, UC Davis, where the pepper spray cop became famous because of what he did to those students that were occupying the campus, and in 1968, the University of Columbia was occupied itself, and they prevented students from attending classes, I think it was, and they didn't the classes were not allowed to go forward, and now you see this quick response, and then you see the Occupy movement of students also being attacked by police, and these things stay in history, like the what people have tried to do all over the world, and trying to do something about it, right? Like whether it be against foreclosures, Occupy movement, against all the investments that were being made and manipulation of the banking system and all that, or in this case against the war against the Palestinian people, whatever. But I I think about my time at Occupy and how much that influenced me and shaped me as well on a personal level, and how I also learned a lot from that time to get where I'm at today, and what worked and did not work, you know. So those times and were also learned lessons, and they will carry on. And I hope the legacy of these protests and people who are participating in them are also giving us a chance to explore further and to keep up with across the board how much this affects us in all areas, whether it be COVID or Palestine, right? It's not just one thing. People focus on one single issue, when at the bottom line, there's beyond just what's happening in the Middle East. It's beyond that. It's also homeland. And, you know, we did an episode on therapy with Jessica. And I would have liked to have known your perspective, Kenny, had you been there.
I started listening, but I haven't finished.
Yeah.
Think of,
and, you know, Andy, I think about what you've said. I've thought long and hard about what you've said afterwards, and about how the students feel these pressures in society. I was obviously speaking when I was being critical about, you know, it's going to possibly be remembered as me making fun of students, Cat Molly being, you know, in a bad mood, and that makes the student upset, whatever. It's just like, I'm not talking about that student who's upset over little things in life. Yeah, there are genuine stressors and things that make people feel that they are, what can I do? And this is their way to outlet to try to do something about it, because they feel so overwhelmed by world events, and it affects their mental health. You know, capitalism does affect your mental health in general. And you know, we live in a society where the pressures of life are not, you know, and props to anyone who wants to have a kid, you know, because it is the pressures of life. How do you have a family and live your life or see your future as a student? The prospects of your future doesn't look very bright, you know. Like the reasons why I have elected not to have a family for a long time is because of my disillusionment of how the world is run. And then you have these protests happening because that's the outrage or the backlash towards, like, I don't want, fuck that, I don't want to have a future like that, you know. This is how I feel about it, you know.
Go ahead, Kenny.
You know, I haven't listened to that episode of fully, but so
maybe we'll do part 2.
But I do, you know, I do think there is a relationship here in this sense to me. Like, when it comes to mental health, it's like, I don't know. There's a quote somewhere. I don't know who the hell quote it is. Whatever. I don't believe in intellectual property. But someone said something along the lines of being adjusted to a crazy system, you know, is no virtue, basically.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's why young people, even though the adults dismiss them as idealists, I was there. I fucking cried when I saw war. When I was part of certain Bible study groups, I would pray for fucking world peace. You know, I was aware, and I became more radically aware of how I came to the spot that I was at. How my father became a political refugee in Guatemala. You know, he had to flee the country because he was, you know, going to be killed after being part of the military and the police. You know, extrajudicial killings in Guatemala. Also, after seeing my father being deported behind a fucking, you know, cage. And so that made me more sympathetic towards, to certain things, that those experiences, but understanding, more gave me the fucking moral outrage that's led me until now. That's led my moral compass that refuses to be well adjusted to bullshit. And so that's why I think like the youth, not just now, like a lot of what we consider kids now, they were disappear in a lot of countries, because they were at the vanguard of fucking pushing for change, and they were the ones who were more morally outraged, and they're the one who ignited shit for people. So sorry, I'm emotional about this because so I don't dismiss them, and there might be lessons that they also have to learn. That's why I'm saying like I hope they learn, because they're a fundamental part of what we're gonna have to fight for. And they maybe we're on the wrong side on some shit, but fuck, this is the reality of the world. This is the shit we're fighting, against. Like we can't fucking expect like I haven't been right on all my fucking positions. Who the fuck has? Who the fuck will? Like I don't agree with Jimmy Dore with a lot of his shit, in his fucking anger, but like I think it's important that he's still talking about shit. I don't agree with Scott Ritter with all of his shit, or Garland Nixon, or fucking Kim Iverson. These are some of the people that I listen to, or I probably won't agree with a lot of these kids, these students. But that's part of the process, like and like if you expect people to always get it right, like fuck, man, Lipson hasn't been fucking right. You, Eduardo, haven't been right. Like,
wait a second. Wait, I'm gonna have to stop you there because I think I have been right every time.
Your students are listening. Yeah, Lipson hasn't been right. But but Lipson has taught me as an elder, the not only taught, but like you have modeled. I'm learning that as a parent. You have modeled what it takes to say I was wrong. I'm rethinking that. Even though you might have been an asshole to Eduardo at some point, like that's part of the process. And like, but keep it. And the other thing is like, you've kept your moral compass, and I think that's important. And I hope these kids don't get swallowed into the fucking capitalist system and just settle and say, this is the way things are, like my fucking parents say, or like a lot of elders say, this is just the way things are. And so, yes, being well adjusted, I don't see that as a virtue. I get it why you do it for survival, but it doesn't make you right. It doesn't make you sane. And actually, like, I think a lot of people are fucking crazy because they just like, pretend to, or can't look at the fucking reality staring at their face, and they rather put their head under the sun. And that's fine. I get it. You have to survive. And some people just want to keep going. But shit is going to hit the fucking fan, and it's already has. It is, and like, and again, that's where I'm going to see what kind of moral outrage some people are going to have when shit is more on their fucking face. Because and I believe in the nature of people, that when people actually know, when they know, like that's why I appreciate, even though we don't agree fully on some shit that Alison McDowell says, right, or the approach, right, like so much information, but I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to inform people so people wake up and have some moral outrage, and I get it, but like, but again, it's a fucking conversation. You have to stick into it, and you have to be willing to be wrong in order to, come up, try to find something. And sorry, like I'm taking over this conversation, but it
You're fine.
Shit into because I've been that kid, that student, and I've also gone through therapy, like you mentioned, and here I am trying to make sense of the world, and I know that all of us have a part in it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying what you're saying, Kenny. Some things it makes me think of that I think are true is, so Naomi Wolf, who I agreed with around a lot of the lockdown stuff, she's taking a position in support of Israel, actually, and also a position against the occupation and things like that. I would disagree with her, but I wouldn't cancel her. I wouldn't say, oh, I'm not going to talk with her. I'm going to say, I thought you were right about some things around the lockdown and about the vax and stuff like that, but you're wrong on this. And there are a whole host of positions that we have thought here. And then, like, I'm working with mostly the groups I'm working with take positions against open borders. You know, I don't agree with that, but those are the people I'm working with. And that's just people are going to understand that is going to be a reality. Like, it seems like we're all in agreement that these campus occupations are things that should be supported. But if there's people in the movement who don't support the campus occupations, I disagree with you, but I'm not like saying I'm against what that belief right there, but I'm not against you. And I think your viewpoint has a space here. We just have to talk it out, argue it out, and we will learn together, hopefully. And I think that's really important, because, you know, like, you have to, sometimes you're wrong, but sometimes you're right. Like, sometimes you're right and the other person's wrong. We also have to learn how to be patient around that. We have to learn how to be like, no, I know this is what we have to do. And I'm saying this to myself. And being patient doesn't mean shutting up, doesn't mean saying it, but it also means you also have to know when the time is to bring it up and to try to make that case again, you know? So I just think it's important. I guess one other thing, I guess we're recording yet. One other thing that comes to mind, and it is a relationship, it is related to both our last, Eduardo bring up our last therapy episode, but also the sort of the way, and I've fallen for this as well, of thinking of like people, young people, so sensitive, snowflakes, not able to sustain themselves. And I keep forgetting that I always say, and I know this is true, capitalism is worse right now than it was 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago. The world is worse for people growing up right now. So what do you think people are going to be like when as the world gets worse and worse? It's going to produce this sort of outcry or crying out in different ways. And to call it snowflake is to act like it's almost talking like, hey, dude, everything's fine. What are you complaining about? It's literally the opposite of what's going on. And the fact is there really is no social movement that exists right now. We would hope the campus one might start something, but that is really small. I saw protests of, and I think it was UC Berkeley even, or one of the UCs, of some of the students who were organizing against what's happening. And it was in a massive graduation, and they were a very small group within a massive place.
Wow.
You know, it's the fact is none of us have been raised in a time of a rising social movement that's gaining confidence and growing and building itself as a power base in opposition to the existing state and existing power structure. And I just think that term snowflake, it exposes the fact, not about the people who we're accusing of being snowflakes. It exposes that we don't understand the world that these kids are being raised in. Like, it is a worse world. It is a by far worse world. Do I know that makes that tougher or whatever? All I know is there's going to be more damage. And the result of that damage is going to have all sorts of implications, particularly if there's no social movement to give anybody hope that damage can be undone. And so we should expect that the impact of kids getting assaulted even worse now than they did in my time when I was a kid, with no seeming end in sight and no social movement that says, here, come here if you want to protect yourself and live a freer life and live a life outside of this tyranny. I think we should expect some pretty strange behaviors from those people. And I just feel like we have to understand them. And snowflake, as if it's like these people who are so tender. Oh, it's like, no, these people are raised in We're being raised in some of the worst, most difficult times in the world in terms of people's hope and despair, not just in the colonized world, but in the colonial powers now, certainly in the US and Europe. So I think we have to rethink how we assess this upcoming generation, I believe. I'm speaking for myself.
I mean, that's a good point. Like, I was talking to you about, my own issues with my mother, like as a parent earlier, and I think some of this stuff comes up, is that this kind of arrogance of, like, just suck it up. This is just the way it is, and even though, like, in this idea that there's nothing that the young people can bring into the conversation, even though, like you said, they're the ones trying to navigate this world, because the elders, a lot of people don't even have a shit sense of the world that we are thrown into, or even people younger than me, like, they don't have a sense of what it's like going to school, right? Like, and this bombarded with so many expectations, the lack of a promise of a fucking world, the reality of you probably never gonna fucking own a home. The not only that, but technological acceleration is gonna, that video that I sent you guys, we talk about, like, that is becoming harder to adapt, because technology is changing so fast. So, like, no one is really gonna have a ground to stand on, because it's gonna change so fast, and that in itself, like, but of course, if you're an elder person, you have no sense, and you rely on your kids to help you navigate, in order to adapt to that changing reality, you're not really understanding the problem here. You're not, and again, even though a young person may not have processed everything, like, again, the experience of just dealing with it, fucking, like, should give you pause to listen, and to see what the hell is it that someone young is trying to say, like you said, and I think that also requires a level of internal maturity, right? Like, in that's something that at least I realize, and I'm learning by becoming a parent and becoming older, in like, my role is changing with time, right? Like, even in the political sphere, like, I'm gonna have to have that patience and that curiosity, really, to listen to young people who have something to say, who are outraged about something, and and who have some energy because they feel something is wrong, right? And I think that's just fundamental part of anybody who's trying to change the world. And again, it goes back to the ability to be open to listen and being wrong and recalculating some of your own notions about things. Like, yeah.
I hope people don't think I'm dismissive of how sensitive people to the world can be. It's a hard place to be in, and having had it as having had the opportunity to foster a kid and to also just live in several countries and see things, and I see how things are. I want to express harshness of the world and capitalist world that we live in. It's not easy, but so I want to be clear that it's something I'm aware of. I really did appreciate, Kenny, you being open and sharing how much you feel for a lot of the youth that are out there trying to make a difference, even if they are misguided, or if some of them may not have it all together, or may not have all their positions straightened out. I think the empathy, the for people, the empathy, the understanding, the comprehension of people's actions. I think that's what matters most. And sure, there might be people who might not be genuine, but I look at the people who are, and that's to me important. And you can always, as long as you're honest, you can never go wrong that way. Because then with your honesty, like, people will see me on what's left. A lot of my honest conversations, I may have been quite arrogant many times, and then I have to have been humbled, and that is what takes. The being honest is good. As I always bring that up because I talk about my own experience. So anyhow, as I want to wrap up and figure out a way to conclude this, my last comments to any of this is I hope that we continue seeing not just this school year's movement, but it's a continuation throughout the summer, and that we also bring it back home. I emphasizing that something I've had to learn through my own journey, my political journey, and so props to them, and I say that genuinely. I don't mean that like sarcastically. Like strong applauds to a lot of the people who have studied for 4, 5, 6 years and suddenly are maybe not getting the degrees because of the consequences of the university rules, of how they were disrupting the peace at their school. And that's a big risk. A lot of time and energy and money invested into your education or your belief about what route you were going to take, and suddenly you decide you want to take up something of a position that is important to you, and then being banned from attending that campus, stepping onto that campus, or last minute changes to university policies being implemented on you, and arrested, and being taken away your right to have your degree after so long of working hard. That's fucked up. No, it really is. So that's my last comments to this.
I don't know, because, sorry, for me, this whole thing about family comes up, because, I wonder, where the parents of these students are, if they're joining, or, because that's one thing I'm very critical in. I think I have a sense of why, the shit that happened in Nicaragua be not happen here. Because, the elders were beat up, the students stepped in, and the fucking parents of the students stepped in, because there are bonds, and that's the thing that worries me about this country, because I think, this lack of sense of commitment, right? Like to family, and to seeing others as family, um, and to be honest, I'm not very hopeful. Yes, I see value in this. I'm still not hopeful, into what's gonna come out of this, because unfortunately the forces of the state are readier for this war, this war of working class people, future workers, and really preparing them for what's to come. More and more, because I don't think this is separate from the dynamics that we've discussed in the show. It's also part of the unfolding of the world that's happening. In the showing of the brutality of the system. That it's gonna become more evident to more people, and more people are gonna get caught in it. But I do, wonder, and I hope, and I think that's where that yes, we have to organize, but it's just not an individual shit, I'm gonna go do this. It's like, who are you bringing in? Who trusts you because you have a moral compass, or because if I would hope that I know my kid, who hopefully will get to see a better world, or if not, she might be out there because she will have a moral compass, and I'll be behind her, I'll support her, you know, and I won't call her just a snowflake. You know, I would try to listen to her, and you know, and yes, you have to get grit and tenacity. I get it. You know, that's part of the equation, you know, of changing the world. You know, and it is complicated, right? Like to grow up in this world, and there are fucking systems in place that also put shit in people's heads. And like, I don't think it's black or white. It's all fucking a mess that we have to navigate. But I think that it goes back to that, like seeing each other as family, as fellow people who feel and you know in hurt and like in you know like I think there is something there for me, at least, because as a parent, you know, like because I want to do different than my parents' ability, you know, to support me, you know, and because again, it's not. I hate this whole quote, like you know, they're the future. No, fuck that. Like we're all the future. We're all in this. We're all shipping this shit. Like don't cop out and like leave the fucking students to go protest and or do whatever fucking actions. Like don't cop out. You know, like if I have to flip this dynamic, like I think actually people who put their fucking head down and just say accept this shit, they're fucking snowflakes. You know, like and you know, but I also, you know, give him the benefit of the doubt because I know it's complicated, you know, being bombarded and constantly brainwashed, you know, into despair, into, you know, into all the fucking pathologies of this fucking system. And so, you know, I guess what I'm hoping for is like healthy families, because this is not just a thing about students or individuals in their own lanes. This is about all of us, you know, and it's all connected, you know, and that's what we have to talk to our cousins who maybe my parents don't talk to, right? Like, or you know, because they're in trouble. So we have to cross those fucking lines, you know, and I think that's what we're trying to do in this channel, right? Like to listen to whoever, you know, to whomever has an opinion or thinks that something doesn't add up or something is wrong, or you know, because like the people that are here are not people who just say put your head down. Like I don't think anybody that's contributed to our show is someone who says just put your head down and like keep going as it is, just suck it up, because they know something is wrong. And like, to me, a lot of the people that are here are family that have contributed to the show. They're family.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's find a way to exit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's do this. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog, what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog, any of those links in the episode notes where you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us at our blog. Or if you'd like to have a shout out, of course, like the middle schoolers that Andy teaches, contact Andy Lipson, as well as our merch. You can always contact Andy Lipson for that merch. Thank you. All right. I'm Eduardo Barca, co-hosts Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lipson. We'll have you all next time. Ciao, ciao.